Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I am so honored to have you on the channel. I cannot emphasize enough just how much I loved your series. And it's been a really long time since I've read a book series that has just like captured my heart and captured my imagination and had me so invested and like fangirling and just reading. And I felt like I was a teenager again, flipping pages and staying up really late. And I just absolutely loved it. And so I'm so excited to have you on the channel to talk about writing thrillers and writing crime thrillers and talking a little bit more about your series. Do you want to tell everybody a little bit more about who you are and what you write and what your books are about?
Sure. First of all, thank you. It's really lovely to be here. Um, so my name is Ellie Marney. I am an author of crime thrillers, mainly fairly horrifying thrillers that are for horrifying people, I guess. Um, so I started as a YA writer and I still write primarily in YA. But a lot of my books have fairly 50-50 split in terms of audience. So I have a lot of adult readers of
Mhm.
books of my books as well. I've been in publishing since 2013. So my first book was published in Australia in 2013. And I am, I guess, a hybrid author. So most of my books have been traditionally published,
Mhm.
but I've also published, well, 5 books now myself, including the most recent book that just came out, All Chamois, which is the final book in the None Shall Sleep series. Yeah.
Were your first books traditionally published, or did you start out self-publishing, or just how were you able to balance the two of those over the course of your career?
I did, I think 3 or 4 books traditionally before I started experimenting with self-publishing.
Oh, cool.
So yeah, I had my first series. My first book was called Every Breath, and it came out in 2013, and they contracted me to write 3 books in that series. So I was with a fairly, I guess, mid-scale independent Australian publisher of children's lit. Their name's Allen and Unwin, and they probably have the best reputation in terms of um, publishing in YA and children's in Australia and New Zealand and, Oceania. Um, they're a fantastic publisher. They're really supportive. They've bought like every book that I've put out traditionally.
Mhm.
Um, but after I finished the first 3 books in that series, I contributed to an anthology. But then I was approached by Alan and Unwin to potentially write a spin-off book to my first series. And I was very enthusiastic at the time and had lots of good ideas. So I just kind of plunged in,
Mhm.
wrote the entire book, and then gave it to them. And they said, this is great. We really love it, but we think it's too old for the YA market
Mhm.
because the characters were a little older and they were like 19. Um, and, this was back in 2016 or something, I guess. So I think I'm going to do like an aside here, sidebar. I think actually the YA market has aged up significantly. I think a lot of like what we used to call YA readers are now reading middle grade,
Mhm.
or upper level middle grade.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so actually, I think there's a lot of more adult content in YA now. So maybe the book that I wrote back then would have been fine now,
Yeah.
but at that time, it was considered a little bit too old and maybe a little bit risque for the YA
Mhm.
audience. So I threw that book in the drawer and then went back to the drawing board, wrote a couple more books, and then I decided I was going to self-publish that book.
Mhm.
I decided, there was no point having it sitting in the drawer. I really was in love with the characters.
Yeah.
So that was my first self-published book. It was 2017, so it was the
Oh, cool.
spin-off book to the Every series. And
Mhm.
then since then, I don't know. I think I've published like 11 or 12 books all up.
Mhm.
And yeah, 5 of them have been um my own release. So, and
Yeah.
then None Shall Sleep, of course, um, came out 2020. I
Mhm.
think, yeah, I wrote it 2019. So, and that was the book that got me a US agent and a US publishing deal.
Oh,
So,
gotcha.
yeah. And then, yeah, so I guess that's the rough history. And
Mhm.
here we are in 2025, and the final book of the series has just come out. I'm really glad you like the series, by the way.
I'm
Thank you for
so
reading.
obsessed with it. I really like, I cannot emphasize that enough. It takes a lot to get me that invested in a book series, and it's been a long time since I've been that hooked into something. So thank you for giving me that feeling because it was awesome. I loved it enough that like I am reading All Shall Mourn on my phone because like I listened to the audiobooks of the first two, and I don't really read physical books anymore, but I love it enough
Yeah,
that I'm actually every spare second instead of like on Instagram, I'm like reading it on my Kindle app. Like
you're
it's
reading it
fantastic.
reading it in digital.
Yeah.
That's very awesome, actually. I love that it's so much more accessible now, like
Mhm.
being able to read on your phone, being able to listen to an audiobook makes everything just a little bit more accessible for everybody.
Yeah.
So people who maybe wouldn't have picked up the book in print are
Mhm.
now getting a chance to access it, which is really great.
Yeah. Well, so I think we're going to talk more about self-publishing and kind of the business side of publishing in the next video that we film together. But in this one, I really
Hmm.
want to focus on digging into writing craft and learning a little bit more about your process and how you approach writing. Because I'm a huge believer that there's no one right way to write a book, and everybody writes very differently. And the only way to learn is to just hear what works for other people and experiment with things. And so I love to have authors on here and just to share about what works for them in the hopes that people listening might be able to cherry pick some things and try out some things and improve
Yeah,
their writing that way.
I
Um,
absolutely agree with that.
so how much do you like to figure out about your books before you start to write?
I started off as one of those people who kind of invents things as they go along. So I was a
Mhm.
pantser when I first started writing. I'm sure a lot of people who listen to you probably already know what a pantser is, but
Mhm.
if you don't, it's like flying by the seat of your pants writing. So you literally sit down with the blank page and work it out from there. And that involved a lot of trial and error and writing stuff and then having to go back and retcon things
Mhm.
and so I think as I got more professional, I've been in the industry for more than 10 years now, and as I got more into writing, I started to realize that it would perhaps save my brain a little if I did more plotting. So, yeah, I started getting into plotting a little bit, probably about 5 or 6 years ago. And actually, it would have been a little bit before then. So it's probably more like 6 or 7 years ago, where I really like to sit down and work it out. The other thing about writing thrillers is thrillers, like all kinds of crime stories, are kind of puzzle.
Yeah.
So it's like you can either do the Sudoku in your head or you can plot it out on a piece of paper first and make it work that way. So actually, yeah, I do a fair bit of plotting beforehand,
Mhm.
mainly just dot points. I also like to start with an idea of how long the book is going to be before I
Mhm.
start. I've always found that really helpful to sort of have a ballpark about like how far ahead I'm aiming for, where's the kind of middle of the story, so
Mhm.
that I can pace out things like dramatic beats or narrative beats. So I kind of know what I'm aiming for, even if I don't know the entire road. Yeah.
Right.
It's like that quote about, it's that very old famous quote about how you can you can drive at night with the headlights on, and even if you only just see as far ahead as the headlights, that allows you to drive
Mhm.
further, even though you can't see everything else, even if it's complete blackness, if the snow's coming down or whatever. But
Yep.
yeah, I'm a little bit like that. I like to have a
Okay.
rough plan, but often characters will take you off on tangents that you're not expecting.
Yep.
Usually, usually it's because you're responding to something within the character,
Mhm.
like um you're writing their point of view, so in a particular scene. So you kind of have to be alive to how their thought process work. how their thought processes work, and also what kind of emotional responses they're having and how that might trigger memories or whatever. So you may end up going off on little segues here and there.
Right.
But yeah, but I do have a rough idea. Hang on, let me have a look. I've got actually a book here where I like plot out all of the, if
Oh, cool.
anyone is not looking, if you're listening to this on a podcast, I have a bit of an idea of where things are headed, and I
Mhm.
kind of make, massive lists of
Oh,
things that I
cool.
would like to include.
Right.
Um, I also, um, yeah, I think it's the puzzle aspect of writing a thriller that
Mhm.
means that you have to be a little disciplined about where you're going with it, what you're doing, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you just, when you lose a sock or something and you're like hunting around your house randomly, like where could this thing be?
Hmm.
Um, so plotting for me is kind of like casting my mind back and thinking, oh, okay, I remember taking the sock off in this room.
Right.
So you have a rough idea of where
Mhm.
things are supposed to be going or
Right.
where you're going to find the path. But yeah, you still do a little searching around.
How are you able to estimate the length of the book? Like, do you have a kind of a shorthand way that or like a little rule that you use? Because I'll find myself saying like, I want the book to be around 100,000 words because I know if it goes like for the plot, if it goes much longer than that, I know it like for this particular idea, it might drag. And so I want it to be like that's kind of the sweet spot, but then I'll start to write and then I'll be at the midpoint at like 75,000 words. I've gone kind of a little bit too far. Is there a way that you're able to balance that and kind of figure out how long it's going to be just based on your idea?
Um, I don't tend to base it on my idea. I tend to base it on industry norms.
Okay.
So, for a YA book, generally it's not going to be more than 85,000 to
Mhm.
95,000 words,
Yep.
and I've actually even gotten, to the annoyance of some of my friends, gotten really particular about page count.
Hmm.
So I will say, okay, like the average YA book is somewhere between 300 and 400 pages. So I think this idea's got enough legs that it'll hold, I'll be able to fit it into like a 400 page container, basically. Those are not, um, yeah, they're not random kind of page count or word count choices. That's industry standard.
Yeah.
So when I was first writing YA, it was, I think 65 to 80,000 words,
Hmm.
but word counts have increased a little. So actually now I think you probably would struggle a little to get a YA book published if it was much under 85.
Hmm.
85 seems to be about standard.
Yeah. Okay.
Um, yeah. And as for whether or not you can make that idea fill up those number of pages or those number of words, that's really down to the idea, I guess, and whether or not
Yeah.
you feel like the idea has enough legs
Mhm.
to carry itself all the way through to the end.
Yeah. Are there plot points that you like to use when you're sketching out your bullet points, like kind of the figuring out where you're going? Do you figure out your ending or do you figure out like a midpoint or do you use a specific plot structure or are there just a couple of plot
Yeah.
points you figure out?
Yeah, I do have a specific structure. I tend to use Save the Cat quite a lot.
Okay.
For those of you who don't know, Save the Cat is hang on, I'm looking over here to my trusty pile of books. So I've got, um, Blake Snyder wrote a screenwriting guide called Save the Cat, which
Mhm.
kind of gives you rough beats for narrative structure.
Mhm.
Jessica Brody took that concept and went on to write a book called Save the Cat Writes a Novel, which
Mhm.
is adapted for novel writing rather than screenwriting.
Mhm.
But honestly, the beats are very similar. Um, so I have an idea for what the first act structure will be like.
Mhm.
I have an idea of what the opening will be like. At some point, there's going to be some sort of trigger or catalyst moment, which is going to propel the protagonist into the
Mhm.
story. Sometimes that catalyst happens just off screen, before you arrive, before the
Mhm.
reader arrives on the first page. And then the character's just reacting to it.
Hmm.
But yeah, I know exactly like at the midpoint, I know there's going to be a
Yep.
fairly major character development or revelation or some sort of change.
Hmm.
And then I have a fairly structured idea about how a finale is supposed to run.
Hmm.
You know, I usually use a 5 point finale. Um, and then and then I kind of people always say, "Do you know what the ending's going to be like?" Yes, I tend to always know roughly where I'm headed.
Yeah.
I knew what happened at the end of each of the None Shall Sleep books. I knew how I wanted the whole series to wrap up.
Hmm.
So once you've got that light in the dark, you've got that like lighthouse on the
Hmm.
hill, and you can just kind of keep following the track, even if
Yeah.
it winds a little bit.
Yep.
Um, yeah, I like to follow the windy path too. I don't like to get too bogged down
Yeah.
in structural stuff, even though I think a firm structure is good,
Hmm.
but I don't want to be ignoring the ways that the characters want to jump either. So
Yeah.
yeah,
I think it's important to have a balance between the two. So you always it's nice to know where you're going, but also leave the door open to be able to discover things because at least I know when I'm plotting, my best ideas are never the ones I have when I first sit down to plot out the book. I always come up with better ones as I'm writing. And if I just totally
100%.
close that out, then I will be closing myself off from making the book better.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, I use Save the Cat quite a lot. I find it quite adaptable as a
Mm-hmm.
structural kind of mechanism,
Mm-hmm.
but different genres have different engines.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you're writing a romance book, that has a slightly different story engine to a crime thriller, for
Yeah.
instance. Like in a crime thriller, you will often have like a finale denouement, but
Mm-hmm.
then at some point there's going to be a little twist.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's really common
Mm-hmm.
in crime thrillers, and it's kind of one of the conventions of the genre. So I actually have to be a little adaptable around how I want to structure things compared to, like this bog standard structure. But
Mm-hmm.
then, yeah, if I want to write a thriller, the reader's going to have the expectations that they have.
Mm-hmm.
Certain things happen at certain points in the story. I was going to say one of the things that we talked about how we have to leave a little wriggle room
Yeah.
in plotting to let the characters kind of take us where we want to go. And I think one thing one thing that people are often asking me is about writer's block, and
Mm-hmm.
and like 9 times out of 10, it's not a structural problem, writer's block for me. I am almost invariably confronted with a situation where the characters are I've set the characters on a path to do something
Mm-hmm.
that they don't really want to do, you know? And that's
Yeah.
where I get blocked.
Yeah.
So I had that problem recently where I got stuck on a scene. It was actually in the last couple of days for the thing I'm writing now. I got stuck on a scene. I didn't know how I was supposed to move forward. Everything felt kind of clunky. The writing felt really dry.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of know
Yeah.
when you're in that zone where things are flowing really well, and you're like, oh yeah, this is great. And then when you hit a blockage, you're like, it's very almost a visceral sensation.
Yeah.
So yeah, invariably it's about giving the characters free will.
Hmm.
So, I have to go back to the point where the character it was doing their thing, and I felt like the writing was flowing. And then I'm like, okay, so I got to this point, and then obviously I made them take path B when they wanted to take path A. So
Hmm.
let's just, scrap the stuff that you've just written, go back, have them
Yeah.
make that decision again, and then go in the direction that they would prefer to go.
Yeah.
And almost always that solves the problem.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting. And it's like a very visual way to think about writer's block too, and just thinking about your characters as actually being agents of change in a manuscript instead of
Yeah,
just shoving them in the direction you want them to go for the sake of the plot.
that's right. You have to start thinking of them as people.
Yeah.
Otherwise, the reader is not going to, be able to connect with them as real people.
Mhm.
That's the main thing. You're trying to create that emotional bond between the character that you've written, this
Mhm.
imaginary person, and the person who's reading the story.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, um, I guess I am as prone to that kind of writer behavior of thinking of the characters as real people. It was actually the first time I went in to see my publisher, like my
Mhm.
first publisher with my very first book. So I went into the office in Melbourne. I had to catch the train down, and it was a really lovely day. And we got in there, and I was very nervous because I'd never published a book before. It was my first
Mhm.
novel, and I was completely unsure of what to expect with my publisher. And then my editor came in, and I met her for the first time in person.
Mhm.
And then we sat down on this lounge kind of chair arrangement in the office, and she was like, "Okay." And then she immediately started talking about the characters like they were people. Like she was like, "Okay, so if Rachel is thinking like this, then maybe she would do this." And I was like, "Oh, okay, you get it."
Mhm.
And so it was like, "Oh, I'm not deranged." Actually, this is how writers and editors talk about story and talk about
Mhm.
characters.
Yeah.
So the little people talking in my head, and narrating their dialogue for me to write down, that's all completely normal. Okay, got it.
I
It
think
was
that
very
that's
reassuring.
a very normal thing for all, like every writer. I think that, I mean, at least for me, that's how I see it too. It's like, that's why I'm so emotional finishing the series. And I'm sure you were too when you just
Yeah.
wrote All Shall Mourn. It's just, it's emotional to say goodbye to characters that you've lived with as real people for a long time because they feel very real to you.
Yeah, I can't believe I'm not going to get to write these characters anymore. It's so weird. I've been writing them since 2019.
Yeah.
So, I know Emma and Travis and Simon and Kristen as well as I would know, a real life person that I go and have coffee with or
Yeah.
something like that. So it does seem very strange
Mhm.
to to be to have to like detach myself from these other people.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a bit sad in a way.
So speaking of plotting, like kind of going back to what we were talking about with plotting before, I'm
Uh-huh.
very interested to learn more about how you plot crime novels specifically, because this is a genre that I mean, I have written like paranormal thrillers, but my next series is going to be way more focused on kind of procedural, like finding serial killers and trying to figure out like how to unlock the like put together all the different pieces of the behavior and the mystery and the clues and follow the characters
Hmm.
as they actually go and like find the killer. And I'm very curious as to how you start with that because I know that there are so many different pieces with all the different clues and everything that you have to keep track of. But how do you develop like the serial killer and the mystery? And like, do you start with the serial killer and figure out what they would do? Or do you start
Hmm.
like kind of do it at the same time? Like you figure out what the serial killer would do and what the mystery would do? And how do you keep track of what the readers know versus the characters know? It just feels like there are a million things to keep track of all at once. And it's very daunting, at least for me going into it. So how do you typically approach that?
Um, well, first of all, I would say don't be too daunted. It's going to be okay. Um, it does seem on the face of it when you're first approaching a plot construction
Mhm.
issue. It does seem a little intimidating.
Mhm.
But I think the first thing that you have to remember is that your central character is going to be your guide.
Mhm.
Yeah. So your main character is like, okay, so to take the example of Not Your Sleep, my main character is Emma,
Mhm.
and I get to know her as much as possible before I even start thinking about the story. Yeah. Before I
Mhm.
even start plotting or anything like that. I get to know who this girl is, what she's been through,
Mhm.
what her upbringing is like, what her kind of base level is, I guess, in terms of her personality and what experiences she's had that's kind of led her to be the person that she is today.
Hmm.
So obviously with Emma, we know that she was abducted when she was 16 and held for 3 days by a serial killer. That horrible things happened to her while she was in this person's basement. She was trapped there with like two other girls.
Hmm.
Up to this point, she'd been having a very normal rural upbringing in Ohio, and she's from a loving family. She's got a supportive, both her parents are together and they're very supportive. She's got an older sister
Hmm.
who loves her, and she's getting a lot of family support. So she's already got a fairly grounded personality. And then this horrifying thing happens to her, and it just completely changes her life, and it's also impacts her personality in lots of really intense ways.
Yep.
And then so there's kind of like a bit of a before and after aspect to her personality.
Hmm.
And then now we know the kind of person that she is now, even though she has this back bedrock of support, of family support. And she's gone through like 2 years of therapy.
Hmm.
And all of these sort of things have happened. But now the kind of person that she is really she's hyper vigilant. She's hyper alert all the time.
Hmm.
She's angry. She's incredibly angry. Um, and she conceals it all very well. She's very, very, very contained
Hmm.
in terms of not just her personality, but the way she expresses herself.
Hmm.
She's got a fairly uh, pessimistic view of human behavior. She's
Hmm.
very nervous around men. All of these triggers and all of these elements of her personality help to form her as a person. So I knew what kind of person she was before the story even started.
Yep.
I knew how she was going to react with other characters.
Hmm.
My job as a thriller writer, if I'm taking a character like that and I'm putting her into a new story, is to basically throw at her everything that she is going to hate.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
everything about Not Just Sleep, everything about that first story is going to be super triggering for Emma.
Hmm.
Everything is going to impact on her. Like she is the character who has the most to lose
Hmm.
in this story. Yeah. And the reason why we're looking through her eyes is because, well, first of all, the reader is going to be connected with her on a really close level. So everything that impacts Emma emotionally is going to hit the reader really
Hmm.
hard. So Emma is the person that I plot the story around.
Hmm.
Yeah. Because she is the guiding light of the
Right.
story. What is going to hit her the hardest is going to hit the reader the hardest.
Right.
So when it comes to constructing obstacles,
Hmm.
scenes, scenarios of places she has to go, people she has to talk to or confront, conversations that she has to have, everything is about what's the worst possible, situation that we can put her in.
Hmm.
Oh, I'm sorry, Emma. Yeah, I really did put her through the ringer in this
Hmm.
series. Um with the ultimate aim of, I guess, seeing how she progresses as a person and how she confronts that.
Hmm.
And, at the end of the day, we want her to have a happily ever after.
Yeah.
We want to see her grow as a person. We want to see her kind of mature and change,
Yeah.
and evolve and maybe, even get over some of the anxieties and emotional pressures that she's under. So, that is kind of the ultimate trajectory of where we're hoping to take the reader.
Yeah.
And along the way, every single scene is designed to give Emma a hard time.
Yeah.
So when I sit down and plot out something like that, I'm looking at like the real nuts and bolts of something like any kind of professional uh, federal police investigation. I've done a lot of research into how an FBI investigates crime, how the FBI investigates crime, how police, like state police and local police, investigate crime. What are the steps that they take? What are the normal procedural stuff? Like that's that's kind of interesting for people.
Yeah.
Most people are quite interested in police procedural elements,
Hmm.
but what are those elements that I can use that are going to hit Emma the hardest.
Yeah.
You know, like if I want her to interview someone, I'm going to put her in a space where she's, like in the first book, she has to interview young serial killers, yeah? And so she's confronted with the very type of people who abducted her. So
Mm-hmm.
she's going to find that challenging right from the get-go.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's also really useful to have a character before you even start the story, a character who has some sort of major issue or problem,
Mm-hmm.
So before the story even starts and you start loading them up, they're already dealing with internal conflict
Yeah.
before the story starts. So yeah, I guess for me, that's what I'm doing. I'm plotting around Emma's triggers.
Mm-hmm.
I'm I'm trying to think of what's the next like regular procedural thing that would happen in a normal investigation.
Yeah.
Um, I'm thinking about where I would like the story to end up because I already
Mm-hmm.
have a pretty good idea of, where I think this is all gonna, how it's all gonna finish, what the
Mm-hmm.
finale is going to be like. So once you've got those elements, you're like, oh, okay, I start at A, I end at Z, and sorry, that's the Australian. So what are the along that timeline of A to Z, what sort of things can I fit in?
Mm-hmm.
I guess, and where are they going to fit in a normal narrative structure where something exciting has to happen at the midpoint,
Right.
something has to happen to trigger the finale,
Mm-hmm.
and in the first part, something has to happen to trigger the characters, you know, pushing them into the story.
Yeah.
So, you know, I'm always like an act one, act two, act three person.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then I'll use Save the Cat to kind of get a rough structure. I'll use police procedure to kind of guide me in terms of like what are the normal steps that you would take. Yeah.
Right.
Um, but it's the characters
Yeah.
that are going to be the ones that tell me basically that lead me into what would be the next most confronting scene for Emma to
Mm-hmm.
deal with.
Yeah.
Yeah. And how is that going to impact on her at each stage?
Right.
Yeah.
Do
And
you
then of
plot out at
course,
all? Oh, sorry.
oh, sorry. I was just going to say there's a couple of things you have to remember, of course, with thrillers,
Mm-hmm.
which is like they have a slightly different finale structure. So there's a couple of little markers that you have to keep a note of as well.
Could you explain what those are?
Pretty normal, like from A to B, the middle, and then as you're getting closer to C, the finale, you know that there's going to be some sort of climactic confrontation at
Mm-hmm.
the end of the story, right? But in a thriller, as a general rule, you'll confront the villain, yeah, and then defeat them.
Mm-hmm.
And then you'll realize, oh crap, that was the big bad.
Mm-hmm.
We thought we got the big bad, but no,
Yeah.
this was just a minion, and
Mm-hmm.
now we're gonna have to fight the real big bad. And then you'll have to
Mm-hmm.
backtrack a little and kind of go, oh, okay. Now
Right.
I'm actually dealing with the real problem.
Yes.
So yeah.
Do you go into the psychology of the villain then? Like, so you start with plotting around Emma and making sure that like all of the scenes are the most triggering for her, and then you go to figure out the procedural element. But do you factor in like what the serial killer's doing in the background the whole time as well?
Yeah,
Like, do you figure out who they are and like why they're killing and what they're doing so that you can line that up with the procedural when you're plotting?
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do all of that. I do so many plotting notes. I showed you that notebook that I have. I have like literally 4 or 5 notebooks with pages and pages of, like okay, well, this is what the villain is like, or this is what the serial killer is like. This is how he or she came to that point.
Mhm.
Um, this was the impact on their personality from this experience that they had when they were a
Yeah.
kid or whatever. I've got to know as much about the villain as I know about the protagonist,
Yeah.
as much as possible about them, just so I know which way they're going to jump in any scene that I put them in.
Yeah.
You just have to have that level of insight into your characters. You
Mhm.
you have to know it. It's like it's like if you're building model train or something, and there's like a little screw that's supposed to go on the underside of the carriage or something. And like you could leave the screw out, you could just, put a little bit of glue in there or something
Mhm.
instead, but you're going to know that it's missing.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
I've got to do it. I've got to do all the little finicky, annoying little details. I've got to know all of that stuff, even if the reader doesn't know.
Yeah.
Um, because yeah, I mean that was, look, honestly, something that I've learned over years and years of writing books, but it's also something that I've experienced when I've been working with an editor from a traditional publishing house,
Mhm.
where they will say, "Well, why did he do that?" And you're like,
Mhm.
"I don't know, I just wrote it because I wanted him to do it." And they will say, you kind of need to know how that's going to happen and
Yeah.
why. What's actually motivating him to do that?
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, and then you're like, I thought you wouldn't notice that. So now I'm kind of like, okay, yeah, I actually have to know all this stuff,
Mhm.
even if only 5% of that stuff makes it into the book, because
Yeah.
otherwise, it would be boring for the reader. The only way I'm going to be able to successfully put this puzzle together is if
Mhm.
I am extremely familiar with all of the puzzle elements. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it really shows in your writing too.
Thank
Like they
you.
all really come like I love the fact that you plot with character first because it really comes across and you get so
Yeah.
invested in the characters and I think that's I mean that's my favorite part of reading. I think that's why your books really just affected me as much as they did is because the characters were just so real and every single one of them felt so real. But
Thank you. I've always felt like, if I mean the plot, the puzzle is really interesting,
mm,
but the people involved, they're the real puzzle, you
yeah,
know? Like they're the puzzle that the reader's most invested in. I
yeah.
mean, any story is just like this thing happened and then this thing happened and then this thing happened, the end.
Mhm.
But, without the characters are what make the reader invest in
Absolutely.
what's happening. Yeah, that's the way it goes.
Yeah. So what does your drafting process typically look like? How many drafts of the book do you do? Do you typically finish a draft? Because like I'm kind of quirky with my drafting. It's like I can never get to the end of the book until I'm absolutely done with it. Like I can't write the climax until I've set it up right. So I always write up until the midpoint, like maybe two or three times, and then I get a little farther and then I go back to the beginning. So how do you typically draft?
You sound exactly like me. I am actually like this a lot too. I have an endpoint in mind. I know kind of roughly where I'm going, finding my way through in the dark. When
Mhm.
I'm drafting, I I always start working longhand in notebooks first.
Oh, interesting.
Um, yeah, mainly because I really feel like, there's a couple of reasons. The first reason is I think it's been like basically scientifically proven that there's a slightly different connection between writing longhand and the different parts of your brain. I don't know. I'm not a scientist, so I don't know. I don't know the science about it, but writing longhand does seem to um, light up different parts of my brain. So I
Yeah.
think slightly differently. And you're not typing fast. You just kind of, there's a certain flow to it, I
Mhm.
guess. The other thing is that I write a lot of dialogue
Mhm.
first. Um, I write a lot of dialogue that doesn't actually make it into the book.
Mhm.
So my, like often the process will start with me sort of thinking about a scene and then thinking about the characters interacting in that scene, what they're saying to each other, and so then yeah, I'll often write like just pages of like A said this, B said this, A said
Mhm.
this in reply. So I do a lot of that. And then when I sit down to write the book, um, I will, I am one of those really annoying people that only basically writes one draft. So I like write a draft and then I know you're laughing at me. It's true.
I'm
No,
not
no, no.
laughing. I'm laughing
People,
because I'm
people
jealous.
hate this.
I
People
wish.
hate this. I say this to people and they're like, "Are you kidding?" Um, other writers, I mean, I'm like, um, they find it really annoying. I know people who will write an entire book and then go back and rewrite it like three, four, five times, and I'm not one of those people.
Mhm.
I am one of the people who has to compulsively edit as I go. So I will write a chapter, and the next day I might be ready to start the next chapter, but I have to go back first and make sure that the first chapter that I wrote is all cleaned up and
Okay.
it's kind of pointing in the right direction that I want to
Yeah.
go. So, the other thing about writing thrillers is a lot of it um, is like the plot is under time pressure.
Hmm.
Yeah. That's one of the key things, along with the twist at the end.
Yeah.
You're often under time pressure. Like there tends to be some sort of ticking clock.
Hmm.
Yeah. So I need to know that all of the forces that are working on these characters, pushing them in the right direction. And it's got to happen it's got to happen fairly quickly. There's got to
Yep.
be fairly strong beats of like tension all the way
Yeah.
through. Um, so I have to know that the previous chapter is doing the work that it needs to do in order to propel the characters into the next chapter or the next scene or whatever.
Yep.
So yeah, I go back, I compulsively, fix little sentences or clean stuff up or, take out this word and substitute this word or whatever.
Yeah.
And then but by the time I've finished the book, it's basically clean copy.
Yeah.
So that's, and then the process of going back and making sure it's all as tight as I can make it is that's kind of the editing process for me.
Right.
Um, yeah, but editing as you go, I don't know. I mean, everybody works in different ways,
Hmm.
and as you were saying in the beginning, like it's good to try different things to see if different strategies work for you when you're writing. I often find different strategies work for different projects as well.
Hmm.
So,
I found that
it
too.
might,
It's really weird.
yeah,
Like I write differently based on what I'm writing. It's really weird.
yeah, yeah. And sometimes, I'll sit down with notebooks and it won't be as effective as writing straight onto the computer. So, each book teaches you how to write it. Yeah.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, I tend to write fairly clean first drafts, and then the editing process is just a matter of how can I make this shorter, more succinct. I am one of those people who likes to cut out as many adjectives as possible. So I do strip out a lot of material after I've finished writing.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, it's also a testament to how much work you do up front too, and just how much time you spend with the characters and how many things you figure out. Like I know you said you don't necessarily plot out every single beat, but if you
Hmm.
do all of that research and you really know the characters, then that's probably tends to lend itself to a cleaner first draft than
Yeah, I
other.
agree. I don't know whether maybe it's just look, I don't know. I haven't talked to as many other crime thriller authors about their process as I have thought about my own process, I
Mhm.
guess. But yeah, because you have to have all these clockwork pieces fitting in together and working in certain ways to
Mhm.
make the finale happen.
Yeah.
I think you actually kind of have to be pretty on the ball
Yeah.
with making sure that everything's fitting and working before you get to the end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's why I can never write the ending until like unless I feel like everything's fitting together because I'm like I'm not going to write an ending that I know is
Yeah,
bad. Like it just I can't bring myself to do it if the pieces aren't lined
that's
up.
right.
But I personally can't get there unless I've like I'll write a draft and then I'll come up with better ideas and then I'll, like two characters, their relationship might just not be quite right and I can't figure out why and then I have to just go and rewrite it. Like it takes a lot more drafting for me to get to a place. But I don't have as much experience too. So I think that it probably
No, it works exactly the same way.
oh.
And honestly, if it's reassuring to you or to anyone else who's listening or watching, um, you every time you start a new book, you feel like you're starting as a beginner writer again.
Mhm.
You have to learn how that book is wants to be written.
Right.
Sounds very anthropomorphic, but yeah, each book tells you how to write it, and the characters in every book um are going to present in different ways, I
Mhm.
guess, to you in your head.
Yeah.
So it is really like starting from scratch again, like with
Mhm.
every single book.
Yeah.
um, I guess that's one of the fun things about writing a series is that You're continuing on with new characters.
Mhm.
People are always talking about how the second book in a series is really hard, and I'm always like, no, absolutely not. I've already done that work.
Yeah.
I've already built the characters.
Mhm.
Now I just have to kind of flesh out what's happening around them. I mean, that's
Yeah.
easy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So second books I often find really easy to write.
Mhm.
Third books are hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So from a technical standpoint, how do you approach building suspense in your writing itself? Like, how do you approach writing action scenes that are very tense? Like, just from a prose standpoint, are there things that you typically do? Are there just ways that you usually employ language to convey the suspense to readers?
Yeah, look, I guess the first step is that I kind of have to feel that tension in my own body,
Hmm.
you know. I had to go in hospital a couple of years ago
Oh, no,
and
sorry.
have surgery. Yeah, no, it was fine. And but after I came out of anesthetic, I was like, oh well, I've got 2 weeks at home on bed rest. I'll be able to work. Huh.
Hmm.
No, no, that did not happen. And that was because after the anesthetic, it took me a while to feel kind of normal and kind of connected to my body again. It did actually take a couple of weeks for me to physically recover from the surgery. And in that whole time, which I mean, I literally spent 2 weeks lying in bed thinking, oh my God, I should be working. But I couldn't generate that kind of physical, emotional connection
Yeah.
to what I was trying to write on the page.
Hmm.
And it was just impossible for me to work. So yeah, I'm one of those people who kind of carries a lot of um nervous tension around
Hmm.
writing finales and stuff like that, and try to translate that into the writing as much as possible. So we all know what it's like when we feel nervous and the
Hmm.
kinds of physical reactions that we have. I'm trying to make sure that the characters on the page are experiencing those reactions as well. I have a couple of really excellent books. One's called The Emotional Thesaurus. I think
Oh,
it's
yeah, I
called
have that one. I love that book.
Emotion
Yep.
Thesaurus. Yeah, and there's another one called the Emotional Wound Thesaurus. So if
Mhm.
your character has got like psychological issues that they're dealing with as well, it'll tell you, well, you don't have to rip straight from the page, but it definitely gives you a little list of, well, this is kind of what happens when people feel nervous, or this
Mhm.
is what happens when people are feeling panicked
Yeah.
or nauseated or depressed.
Mhm.
So these are the normal physical reactions for someone who's experiencing those kind of emotional conditions. So
Right.
I'll often kind of go, oh yeah, well, that's a useful resource. Um, but um yeah, I'm just um I do write in terms of writing craft often. Have you ever been in a serious accident? Sorry. This sounds a little personal. If
I've
you've
I-
ever
I've been
been in,
lucky that I haven't, but I've been around people who have. Like I've been in
yeah,
that moment with other people.
yeah. And when you have that kind of heightened, like adrenalized kind of reaction when
Yeah.
you get really bad news,
Yep.
or you're involved in an accident, or
Mhm.
something bad has happened and it's happened like suddenly.
Yeah.
Um, that you'll know yourself from experiencing that in your own life, that the texture of time and dialogue and all of that stuff really changes. Yeah. So
Mm.
when you're stressed out, you're not speaking in full sentences. You're often speaking in a kind of shorthand to the people that you know. Um, Everything feels very immediate. You get a lot of physical sensations on your skin,
Mhm.
even if you like, I was driving the other day and I had a really close call when a kangaroo jumped out in front of my
Oh,
car. This is
shoot.
what happens in Australia frequently. It's like, I don't know what the comparison would be in the US. Absolutely terrifying when you're at that point where you sort of think, and
Yeah.
you feel that gasp, and suddenly everything is kind of alive
Yeah.
inside you. And from your own physical reactions
Hmm.
what that feels like.
Yeah.
So you want the character to be feeling that as
Hmm.
well, and you want the reader to be feeling that through the character.
Hmm.
So short sentences, abbreviated dialogue, quite often you're looking at sentence rhythm. Like,
Hmm.
you don't, you can have like one long sentence and then short, 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 or something like that, something that's going to build up the pace. It's like
Yep.
you want the sentences to feel like your heartbeat is kind of
Hmm.
elevated.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're looking at also shorter paragraphs,
Hmm.
the reader, I my experience of reading a book when I am reaching the finale and everything is really exciting is my eyes are skimming really fast.
Yeah.
Yeah. And my eyes are moving across the page, and any extraneous information is kind of like, I don't need it. I just want to get to the end. But that's what it's like when you're reading something really exciting, and at the
Yeah.
end, you don't need a lot of extraneous description. You want
Yep.
you want very tight, controlled description that your eye can kind of track real fast,
Yeah.
because your reader's not going to take that information in.
Yep.
They're going to like that, you're describing something that, or a scenario or environment that your protagonist is in. The reader is not really interested. They just want to
Yeah.
know roughly where the protagonist is in space.
Yeah.
And if you've done your job leading up to this scene, they will have an idea of what the environment is like already.
Yep.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Um, there is also this kind of like, it's kind of like a physical gasp. You want this kind of inhale breath, and then there's going to be an exhale release at the end.
Hmm.
So you're trying to match, I guess, the writing with those physical reactions from the reader and from the character. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um and also there's I actually cannot remember, this is going to be really bad. I can't remember who to attribute this quote to, but at the end of the story, somebody said famously, when they were making action films, or they were making some sort of films, and they were like, you you give them you do the finale and then you get out.
Hmm.
You get out as fast as possible.
Hmm.
So that's kind of my strategy as well.
Yep.
I try to keep the finale very tight. It's usually only one chapter, or like, I follow a five-stage finale. So there's like four chapters leading up to that finale. Like, really, this is the end.
Hmm.
So
What are
but
the
that
five stages
final
that you follow? I've never heard of a five-stage finale.
Oh, okay. So the five-stage finale is, hang on, let me consult my my plotting manual. Almost almost all the finales that I have written have had some sort of five-stage finale.
Hmm.
So usually what happens is the first one is like, for a 5 point finale, you break it down into like five sort of sub beats. Okay. They're kind of
Hmm.
like road markers, I guess. So the first stage is like, storm the castle. Yeah. But
Oh yeah.
first of all,
Okay.
point one is you gather your team together. So like, the protagonists have to get together. They form a plan. They may
Hmm.
gather the materials that they need to
Hmm.
execute that plan. You're getting everyone together. Quite often, this is the point where, if there's been any interior emotional kind of upset between the
Hmm.
characters, this is where they will be like, well, we have to put all of that aside. We have to make friends again.
Hmm.
Let's shake on it, because otherwise, unless we, have a united front, then we're never gonna beat this
Hmm.
this final villain.
Yep.
So everybody kind of gets together. They're united with one purpose. They've got their plan, and they're ready to go. Yeah. And then the second point is like, okay, now we're going to storm the castle. Yeah.
Hmm.
We're going to execute the plan that we that
Yep.
we tried to formulate. So the plan seems to be working. Everything's going okay. And quite often this is the point where one of the characters will make some sort of sacrifice so
Hmm.
that the lead protagonist can go forward
Hmm.
to have that final, confrontation.
Hmm.
Um, like there's a few beats in there where there's a few things that you can put in there, but it's always kind of like, okay, we're actually doing it. We're making this happen.
Yep.
Then the third point is, no, this plan isn't going to work.
Hmm.
Either there's been some sort of like booby trap or
Hmm.
some sort of disaster like has happened where, a weapon has been lost or something's happened. Basically, it means the annihilation of the original plan.
Hmm.
And then the protagonist is like um has to go on unaided
Yeah.
almost invariably. Yeah. At which point, the fourth point in the 5 point finale is that's when the protagonist has to reach really deep inside themselves and find the skills or the tenacity or the whatever is the core aspect of their personality
Hmm.
that is going to push them to help them defeat the villain,
Yep.
or the sacrifice that they have to make to defeat the villain.
Hmm.
That's when they're going to make it. And then finally, point five is when the confrontation actually happens. There's a
Yep.
new plan now. We're going into it. We might not have anything, but this, we may have empty hands, but we've got determination or whatever it
Yeah.
is. That the resolution of the characters kind of I guess their internal struggle all this
Mhm.
time. They've managed to resolve it for themselves, and now they go into this confrontation with the
Mhm.
villain, feeling like, well, chances are I'll probably lose,
Yep.
but I've got to try,
Yeah.
and then you have your finale scene.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's how I usually structure almost all the finales that I write. And yeah, I don't tend to muck around too much with that kind of structure for a finale. It seems to work pretty well.
Yeah.
I also sort of feel like a lot of the structural stuff, a lot of people, when they first start writing books, or any kind of story, they bounce off the idea of having any kind of structure,
Hmm.
um, which I understand. I totally get that. Because you want to write the thing that you want to write, yeah, that's unique to you. So
Yeah.
the feeling tends to be if I'm using a structural plot or a plan, then the things that I bring to the story that are uniquely me are going to be lost, or it's going to become some sort of cookie cutter outcome or whatever.
Hmm.
What I would say is that, like any kind of recipe, it's like recommendations rather than guidelines, I
Yeah.
guess. So you can play around with this stuff a little bit. Although I think with sidebar, I think with thrillers, it's actually really good to have a strong finale structure
Hmm.
because that helps you pull everything together effectively.
Absolutely.
For a lot of newbie writers who are kind of bouncing off structure, I would say also a couple of things. First of all, traditional publishers are aware of these types of structures. They are aware that they exist. They refer to them a lot. I remember the first time I went into an editorial meeting with a trad pub, and they were like, "Okay, we've got Act One and Act Three sorted out. Act Two is a little flabby." I was like, "Oh, okay, so you know how all this works," and they were like, "Yeah, of course." So, so traditional publishers use this stuff as
Yep.
well. They refer to it a lot. The other thing I would say is readers know how these beats are supposed to work.
Yeah.
Readers
It's
have
all
they've
subconscious
absorbed
expectation. Yeah.
yes, yes. Readers have absorbed this stuff from fairy tales, from
Hmm.
from mythology, from the stories that they heard growing up, sitting on their grandma's knee.
Yep.
There's an expectation in the reader of, okay, certain conditions have to be met, certain beats have to happen for the story to progress.
Yeah.
If you mess with those beats,
Hmm.
the reader is going to feel like there's something wrong. Yeah. They're
A
going to
hundred
like,
percent. Yeah.
this isn't supposed to happen now. This was supposed to happen way back then or whatever.
Hmm.
So the reader has the expectation that those beats, those narrative beats are going to be met.
Hmm.
Yeah. And you're kind of what you want to do is keep the reader engaged as much as possible.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, in order to write something that's going to appeal to a reader, you do have to trust their gut.
Hmm.
And their gut is telling them this is how a story like this is supposed to go.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Every story they've ever heard, every fable, every movie they've ever watched,
Hmm.
they people are very well educated readers.
Hmm.
So you kind of need to respect that as well.
Yeah, totally. And in that vein, to kind of wrap us up talking about all of this, what do you think are the biggest subconscious reader expectations that people have with thrillers?
Good question. I think reader expectations around thrillers is, for one, your villain is way stronger than your protagonist
Hmm.
right from the get-go.
Yep.
In fact, unless you have a strong villain, you basically don't have a thriller.
Hmm.
Yeah. There should be at no point during the story until you get right all the way through right up until the finale. At no point should the reader think, this villain is going to be fine. This protagonist is going to be fine. You
Hmm.
know, um, they should be worried all the way through that this protagonist is too weak to defeat this villain. And
Hmm.
how on earth are they going to get through this story and the finale? And how is this villain possibly going to be defeated?
Yeah.
If they're up against this protagonist, I mean, Emma has no real personal advantages in None Shall Sleep or in any of the books. She's a teenage girl. She's not law enforcement.
Hmm.
She's already hypersensitive and kind of emotionally and psychologically compromised on so many levels. Um, she is not the person that you would put front and center to defeat
Yeah.
a serial killer.
Hmm.
Yeah. She's she's not like a martial arts
Yeah.
genius or anything like that. She's got none of the particular skills that you would think would be ideal for confronting the villain in any of the books.
Hmm.
Um, so she's at a unique disadvantage and uniquely disadvantaged place.
Hmm.
Um, so that's a good start. The other thing is, in a thriller, the reader always knows a little bit more than the protagonist.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's probably the main difference between like a mystery and a thriller. Like in a mystery, the reader and the protagonist find out the clues together and kind of figure it out together, you know? That's how it's worked in almost all of Agatha Christie's books
Right.
and all the Richard Osman mysteries and things like that. Like we don't really know any more than the protagonist.
Right.
It's one of the golden rules of mystery is that you can't cheat. You have to give the reader the same amount of information that the protagonist has so that
Yeah.
they can work it out together.
Yep.
But in a thriller, those rules are different. In a thriller, you want that sense of like when you're watching a movie and the protagonist is about to go through a door and you, the viewer of the film, are like, that there's going to be something bad on the other side. And you're like, no, don't go in there. You
Yep.
want that feeling all the way through a thriller. So you give them a little bit more information. You give the reader a little more information. And whether that comes in the form of a couple of scenes through the point of view of the villain, or whether you plant a few clues that, the reader's going to go, oh, they didn't pick up on that. Okay, that's going to become important later. And the protagonist is blithely kind of like, oh, yeah, no, I'm sure it'll be fine.
Yeah.
But the reader
Yeah.
knows something. There's something about having the reader on your side
Hmm.
too when you're the writer, and it's almost like the reader and you, the writer, are kind of like teaming up against the
Yeah.
protagonist. So it's like, yeah, no, that's not going to be the right way to go. And the whole time the reader is going like, oh no. So yeah, that's what you need to have. Those are the two main things. And then of course the finale, there's going to be a little twist in the finale. You think things have worked out, maybe they haven't. That
Yep.
doesn't happen in every single thriller. But it almost, I would say about 85% of the
Hmm.
thrillers that I've read are most effective when you're like, Oh, we've disarmed the bomb. Phew, now we can relax. Oh no, wait, the bomb isn't the real bomb. The real
Right.
bomb's over there and over across the street in that other building,
Yep.
and that's tends to be the, the little twist at the end.
Yeah.
Also, that's three. Then the fourth thing is always the time pressure. There's going
Yeah.
to be some sort of ticking clock time pressure. Someone's going to die. It's going to be life and death.
Hmm.
It's just a matter of like, will the protagonist make it in time?
Yep.
Yeah. So those are the key ones, I think, for
Okay.
any kind of thriller.
All
Yeah.
right, cool. And then this is just a last bonus question that I have.
Excellent.
And it's not quite about thriller writing, but the relationship that you developed throughout the series between Emma and Travis was one of the most effective slow burn romances I've ever read. And I would love to hear how you approach writing like tension between characters because they were both so unaware of it happening as it was developing. And I think that that's one of the reasons it was so effective. It's because you, like the reader, could really see what was happening between them, but it's not like they were having asides being like, I'm developing feelings. Like it was like very, very subtle and very well done. And so I would love to hear your tips on how you did that and if there are any strategies that you employed to develop that.
I'm really glad that you like that. Emma and Travis are such sweethearts, and we want them to find that connection right from the
Mhm.
get-go, I think. But much like a thriller, like a plot line, the reader sees a little bit more
Mhm.
than the characters themselves. Yeah. So I guess the thing that I incorporated the most is just whenever they're in the scene with each other, they have this constant kind of sensitivity or awareness of each other and what the other person is doing.
Yeah.
Um, and just that sense of presence, like whenever Emma's in the room and Travis is there, she's always kind of like got him in her peripheral vision, or or kind of, it's like she can kind of feel his energy in the
Mhm.
room, and that is something I start with and then slowly build up so that there's little moments where like they make first physical contact, or
Mhm.
they every physical contact has significance,
Mhm.
even if they're just passing a pen or,
Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
So, and they're always aware of what the other person is doing and how they kind of start to become a bit like emotionally attuned, so they're on the same wavelength. So
Yeah.
whenever Travis enters the room, if Emma's there, he's already very aware of how she looks, what she seems like, what her facial expression is like. And also from that, he can kind of say, well, it seems like she's really anxious right now, or something like
Mhm.
that. So he's got this kind of constant awareness of her.
Mhm.
Um, and I tried to write him as like the perfect foil, I guess, for Emma, like I mean, that was the thing about Travis, which I really enjoyed writing, is that he's in law enforcement, or he's on a law enforcement training track,
Mhm.
but he's really not macho, you
Mhm.
know? He's like the opposite of macho. He grew up, supporting his mother and his younger sisters.
Mhm.
So, he's grown up with women, and he's comfortable around women, and
Mhm.
he's not threatened
Mhm.
by strong women around him, I guess. He just treats them like colleagues.
Yeah.
And um I just wanted to write this strong, principled, um, self-disciplined guy who is used to being a family support for his female family members,
Mhm.
coming into contact with this young woman who needs all the support that she can get. In this
Mhm.
situation, she
Yeah.
needs she needs a lancer. She
Mhm.
needs a second who's like stands by her shoulder, like a general who stands
Mhm.
by her shoulder and supports her at every point. And I wanted Travis to naturally have all the attributes of that right from the get-go. So yeah, it was a real pleasure writing their scenes.
Yeah.
Every time I'm writing them, it was like, okay, I just can add a little bit every, like I just like a little like eyedropper of
Mhm.
additional contact or notice or
Yeah.
awareness or dialogue, like every little thing I can add along the way and just add it a little bit at a time until,
Yeah.
we can build to a final recognition that they're together. So
Yeah.
yeah,
No, what I really
that
loved
was
about
really
their
fun.
relationship, it's like it progressed so organically that it's like they didn't even kiss until book three, but like they
Yeah.
were so close in every other way. Like it didn't feel
Ah, I
like
love
it was
that.
just it was awesome. It was just like you could really like see them coming together and like depending on each other, getting
Slowly
really close. Yeah.
closer.
Yeah.
I
No,
mean,
it was
that's
great.
the thing I've always like loved about writing romantic elements is I like seeing how people slowly kind of get closer and closer
Yeah.
emotionally.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, that's the ideal kind of development of a relationship.
Yeah.
I guess where you slowly can't, this, I have a real allergy to kind of insta love, I
Yeah,
guess,
me too.
where like, um, I mean, I do believe in kind of love at first sight, I guess. I think that's how I met my partner. But at the same time, we spent a lot of time getting to know each other and before we acted on any of that. So even if there's an emotional connection there, they want to, you want to see the characters sort of slowly shifting
Yeah.
so that they get closer emotionally.
Yeah.
Um, I was going to say too, like one of the things I really had to fight hard for when the first book published. Um, so Nudge to Sleep was the first book that came out. It was through Little Brown for younger readers. And my editor really, really wanted me to amp up the romance in that book.
Mhm.
Um, and they I had to fight really hard to not do that, to
Mhm.
have the relationship develop slowly. I guess, in my mind, I had a three-book series in mind,
Mhm.
even if my publisher didn't. I had to stay true to what I really wanted for the story and for the series.
Yeah.
And if they never, like if I had never been allowed to write any more books in the series, I felt like the reader could kind of extrapolate that at least Emma had made this connection with this person who really got her,
Mhm.
who understood her in Travis.
Yeah.
Um, and then yeah, I mean, the most important thing that I had to emphasize with my editor was like, this is a girl who's recovered from sexual violence.
Yeah.
And she's spent 2.5 years in therapy and she's had things happen to her that like would completely destroy most people. And now she's been thrust back into this situation where she's being pushed back into this scenario that affected her in the first place. There's no way she's going to be ready to like start kissing boys and it's just not
Yeah.
going to happen.
Yeah.
I had to kind of give time for the character to recover.
Mhm.
She wasn't ready.
Yeah.
She wasn't ready for any kind of romantic relationship, certainly not in the first book.
Yeah.
Um, it would not have made sense for her as a character, and I don't think it
Yeah.
actually would have made sense for the reader either. I
Mhm.
think I think, most readers have a more realistic expectation
Mhm.
of how people recover from trauma.
Mhm.
Yeah, readers have experienced their own traumas,
Yeah.
so they know what it's like.
Yeah.
Um, I didn't want to push the characters to do something that felt unreal for them.
Mhm.
And yeah, but I'm really glad that I stuck to my guns on that because
Yeah.
I felt like it was a really key element of her personality.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for talking to me about all this stuff. This was really insightful and gave me a lot of stuff to think about and things that I hadn't thought about thrillers before either. Like that point about how the reader should always know a little bit more. I had it in my head that it was more like mysteries, but you're so right
Mm,
that they really, like in all the thrillers I read, I always know a little bit more about the characters. I just hadn't put that together yet. So thank you
yeah.
so much for that. Well, do you want to quickly tell people where they can find you too? Like where, like what your Instagram handle is and how to
Yeah.
subscribe to your newsletter?
That's a good idea. I totally forgot about that. So my website is elliemarney.com, obviously. And my Instagram is probably my most outward facing platform. So I'm just, Ellie Marney on that as well, at Ellie Marney. On pretty much everything except TikTok, where I'm Ellie Marney author. So yeah,
Mhm.
and I'm on all the things, but I dip in and out of them fairly frequently,
Yeah,
except for
me
Instagram.
too.
It's the only regular thing.
Mhm.
So my newsletter is called The Black Hand,
Mhm.
and I also have a paywall newsletter called Nail Biters, which people subscribe to if they're really into, like, I do a lot of behind the scenes sort of talk there, and people doing my, people who have signed up for Nail Biters tend to get a little bit of an early look at everything. So yeah, that's where I'm at.